Hello and welcome to this tutorial for the Terrain Remix Brushes add-on, where I'll teach you about scattering. Now, scatter devices can be used to scatter assets such as rocks and vegetation on your terrain. Let's start right ahead with the rocks. I will take this and drop it onto our terrain. And as soon as you do this, the first time you drop in the rocks, you will need to press Alt, click on all the locations while holding Alt pressed, release Alt and press 0, and do the same thing for the rotation. Press Alt, hold 0, no, release Alt 0, enter. It's a little problem I haven't been able to fix yet. It's bad because when you drop this in, all the collections which are linked to this item are gonna be dropped in at the same position. But for the scattering, I need all these rocks in the collection to be at 0. That's why they're here right now. Okay, so we can hide this collection for now. And we have a rock scatter here. I'm gonna go back to viewport shading right now. Makes things a bit more easier. And for scattering, I will also change the resolution of the terrain back to 500 for performance reasons. Now, to work with the scattering, you have to go into modifier properties, and there you have to specify some of these options here. And first you have to specify which landscape is going to be used to scatter. So I select this landscape, and as you can see, we've already got some rocks appearing here. And if I scale this object, you will see that the objects get scattered only inside of the box. There's also a way to change the softness of this box. Like here, there's a bounding box fall off. If I put it to 1, the rocks are gonna hug the right edge of the box and create a really square pattern on our terrain. But if you want to use this box for scattering them softly, just in one area, you can turn the fall off to a certain value. But right now, I want to scatter on all the terrain, so there is really no need for the fall off right now. And if I want to hide some of these ugly lines, I can disable display bounding box, and we have just the rocks on the terrain. So we have a few settings here for the density, for the density tightness. All a bit difficult to explain these concepts, but these settings here are not the only ones you should use. You should go into geometry node editor and have a look at this graph here. Sorry, it's like in the material, I try to make things maybe a bit more complicated to use, but with more potential for doing your own things and adapting the whole system to your own needs. But I tried making it a bit easy to understand by including this viewer node. So if you click on this symbol here and the eye, we will see the mask, this mask here, coming out of this whole series of nodes, which is then later used in the scattering for scattering rocks. So right now, the white areas are areas where the rocks are more probably gonna be scattered. So from there, we can maybe also have a look at some of these other settings, like the density tightness. Like at 0, it's like gonna be very loose. If I put it up, it's only gonna scatter on the higher values of the mask. Then we have a clamp, and from there we can also like turn the density down, but in a different way than by using this density here. Here we have, of course, a setting for the size of our meshes, and we have also a setting called size variation. If we put this to 1, you will see the size of each individual rock which is scattered is gonna vary a lot. If you put it to 0, they're all gonna be pretty much the same size. And then we have some way of controlling a random rotation on the X and Y axis. This adds a bit of wobble to our rocks. I like to keep it quite low. Then we have a random Z rotation. If we tick this off, all the rocks are gonna face the same way. Then we have align the rotation to the terrain. If I untick this, all the rocks are gonna basically point up. This is normally only useful for vegetation, for trees, which always point to the sky. Then we have an offset, so that decides how much the rock is gonna go into the terrain. And we have a seed, which randomizes things. Randomizes the noises and the placement. So I think we'll check out again this viewer node and specifically more what's happening with all these devices here, these nodes. So you've got the first thing is the tree line. I use the term tree line because this is a feature I mostly use with trees. And this decides that a certain height, maybe the trees will stop growing, or at a certain height the trees will start growing. In this case, gravel should not stop or start growing somewhere, but if we take a look at our terrain without a viewer node and in the rendered mode, right now we have some rocks scattered on our snowy areas, and I really don't like that look. I will try to use the tree line feature to disable those rocks, so they will start scattering only at the value of 100 meters or lower. Okay, well, let's go back into normal shading, and there's a few other features. This one, subtract flows on steeper slopes, is useful only for vegetation really, so I will show it when I do some vegetation. Then I have some add weight map details. The way we can see what this does is by mixing this out or mixing it in. Right now what it does, it usually adds some erosion information. Then we have a second one. This one basically does the same, just with a few different controls. I think this weight map details, it uses a noise texture as well, while this one is just pure erosion information, which you can apply or not apply. So for gravel, this is usually the way to go, to use these erosion information flows, which can be changed like this on this erosion mask device. Then we have another one, a noise-based empty slots, I call this, and this removes scattering from certain areas using a noise texture. Here we can change the scale of this noise texture to be super small or super big. I like in the gravel, in this rock scattering, I like to have somewhere in the middle. Can also change the middle value to be either higher or lower. And then I added this float curve for some contrast. So last things is this limit growth on flat and steep slopes, which will basically say that we don't want gravel on the steeper slopes. So like areas where there's rock faces normally, gravel should not be able to accumulate on these areas. Like stones would tumble down. And we've also got a limit growth on flat slopes. And that's a little feature which adds, well, in this case, in this terrain, not a lot. But I like to keep the rocks a bit out of the very flat slopes, because when a rock tumbles down from a terrain, let's go back to this view, it usually stops at a certain point and doesn't keep falling and rolling more downhill if there is no slope. So when they reach a flatter slope, they normally stop rolling down. Then here we have this power. Well, both these devices here are controlled by the density tightness and the density clamp. So the way I suggest you to edit the masks for yourself is with these devices here. This part here, I'm not gonna go too much into detail. I will show you later with a vegetation maybe. And yeah, so that's it for the rocks. I can just quickly show you, maybe if we drop in some medium rocks like this, we select the landscape. Right now you see, oh, this got dropped into the wrong collection, we need to put it in the scene collection. These medium rocks, they're smaller than the larger rocks, of course. Gonna reset the rotation, make the box bigger, disable the bounding box, and now what I should do is change the tree line, but I will show you quickly another way to do a tree line, which is, I guess, just moving your device, your scatter box down. So now there's no scattering going on up here. And yeah, so we now got more rocks, and I could use the small rocks now, which is basically the same. I like to have 3 different sizes of rocks, and the density goes up with the size, or down with the size. I guess big rocks are not so dense, while the smallest rocks are denser. Right now I could drop this in, but what I could also do is just duplicate this medium rocks, change the size to be smaller, so like 0.7, and let's also change the seed so it distributes more randomly, and we up the density to maybe 1 or even 2. So now we have a lot of smaller rocks, some medium rocks and some big rocks. For the small rocks, maybe I always also change the density tightness, so there's like a lot of rocks even on the grassy areas. Maybe it's not wise. We'll have a look at this in viewport shading now. Well, the rocks are really small, and right now a problem as well is that the color is not really matching with the underlying gravel texture. So for that I go into shader editor and I select one of these rocks, I zoom out, and I use a hue saturation value node, drop this in. Maybe we want a hue that's more bluish, like this maybe, but we turn the saturation down as well, and I want to turn the value up to make the rocks more bright. That way they will also stick out here in the grassy areas and add some interesting detail from far away. And there you go. That's how you scatter the rocks and manage their coloring. So let's pass on to the vegetation. I think for that, first gonna put all these rocks into this collection here. Oh, pardon. And I'm gonna disable both the medium and the small just for performance reasons, because there's a lot of them on the terrain. So let's have a look at the broadleaf trees. I dropped this in, and again now I here have to do this operation of holding Alt, resetting the location and the rotation to 0 for our collection to be in the location of 0. Now, where are these items? Again, they're in the wrong place. So let's move them back to the scene collection. And again, let's select our landscape as object for scattering. Now I scale this up to the whole terrain, and we can see I got a lot of these little trees. Now in the project files, I included these low poly trees because I'm not a vegetation artist. So I'm not good at making trees for Blender. But you can replace them with any asset that you want. And yeah, let's have a look at some of these settings. Well, here on the side, it's the same. And if we say the density right now looks kind of okay. So we go more into the geometry nodes and have a look at what's happening with our mask. So this is where the terrains get, the trees get scattered on. And right now it's quite evident there's not a lot of erosion information in this mask here. But there is a thing going on, and it's this subtract flows on steeper slopes. That's the thing I was talking about earlier with the gravel, where if I turn this down, you can see the trees are gonna scatter or not scatter in these areas. Let's have a look at what this looks like in reality. So if I turn this down, we have some trees in the gravel. If we turn it up, they're not growing on the gravel. And there's this way of controlling as well the slope at which this happens. Like if we only want it to happen at steeper slopes, because there is gravel regularly falling down from the mountains in the steeper areas, and there is for sure no vegetation growing there, then we put in a higher slope. And yeah, there's a way of making also the slope mask, make it look different by changing values in this erosion mask device here. So what's next? Well, we've got the tree line as before. Maybe we can lower it slightly for our broadleaf trees, like this. There's also noise on this tree line. We can change the scale of the noise to look a bit more organic. So yeah, the first thing that happens to this mask is we get this subtraction from the flows. Then we've got some, what is it? Weight map details. It's not very strong right now. If you turn it up, you'll see we'll get some more distribution based on, I guess, erosion information. But I will not have this too strong. Then we have another one, is just erosion mask being applied again. I don't want too much of that, but maybe I actually want to have more effect from this noise. Maybe I will just want no trees in certain areas, and we can have a look at this, or the effect of this. If we turn this up, so we get some areas where there's just only grass and no forest. Can change maybe the scale of these spots by turning the scale down. Can also change the seed until we find a look which satisfies us. And the middle value, you can see if I turn the middle value down, it's gonna have less and less trees. If I turn the middle value up, it's gonna have more trees. And of course the limit growth on flat slopes. And on steep slopes, I don't want my trees to grow too close to the rock, so actually I will turn this down by a lot. Maybe let's turn it down to 20. No, 20 is too much, but let's say 25. Usually pine trees grow on steeper slopes, and the broadleaf trees not so much. And yeah, what else? I think maybe we can take a look at the pine trees. Yeah. So, or fir trees. Let's drop them in. Like before, we have to Alt reset the location, Alt release reset the rotation. And again, they're all in the wrong collection. Go into modifier properties, select the landscape as a scattering, and let's turn this overlays on again, and let's scale this fir tree up on the whole terrain. Let's disable the bounding box, actually do the same for the broadleaf trees, disable, and right now there's trees on the snowy parts. We don't want them there. For that we go into geometry nodes, select our fir tree, and change the value for the tree line. Actually 100 is a good value for where the snow seems to start. Or do we want to lower the tree line from here? Let's get them mixing a lot, or mixing a bit here on the edges, so we get some mixed forest. And actually I don't want them to grow so close to the snow, so I will also go down a bit. And yeah, I think for the fir trees, I don't want to remove a lot of them, because when you look at pictures of fir trees high up in the mountains, they usually grow very close together and very densely packed, very uniformly covering all of the terrain. So that's why I'm not subtracting too much here with this empty base slots. I think, was it this one? Like I did with the fir trees, like this. Have some spots without trees. I think for the fir trees it looks a bit unrealistic. I like to keep them uniform like this. And I think that's all for the scattering. Maybe let's quickly turn up the resolution again to check out our terrain in full glory. There you go. Compiled at 3000. This took a while. I cut some part of the video out. And there's our assets. Actually, we've got these rocks turned off. Let's turn them on again. So we have everything now. We have the small rocks, the trees, and a colored texture terrain. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and see you in the next one.